Well, a lot certainly happened since we last covered the Transformers back in episode 202 of the Random Trade Review. In that episode, I pointed out that IDW had lost the license to Transformers and G.I. Joe comics, with the most likely candidate to acquire that license being Skybound. That's Robert Kirkman's imprint at Image Comics. However, not too long after that, a little wrinkle popped up.
Marvel Comics announced that two other Hasbro properties that had lengthy runs with the company, Micronauts and ROM Space Knight, will be getting long-awaited omnibus releases. This couldn't help but make people wonder if the same could wind up applying for Transformers and G.I. Joe as well. And then about 2 weeks later, Robert Kirkman made the announcement official, as Jetfire popped up in a Skybound book called Void Rival, signaling a new shared universe.
Now, Skybound has announced that they intend to reprint all previously published material, including stuff from the IDW continuity. That being said, there hasn't been a formal announcement made of any type of solicitation or what format that's necessarily going to be, whether that's going to just be regular trade paperbacks or in a big omnibus format or a compendium or anything of that nature, outside of a few classic issues that we've already covered being released digitally. So, yeah, this is probably going to be the last classic era Transformers, or G.I. Joe for that matter, that we're going to be reviewing for a while. But speaking of classic era Transformers,
the original Marvel run of Transformers ran for 80 issues of the original 4-issue limited series. During that time, however, there actually was a sister publication for Marvel's UK branch. That series was written by Simon Furman, who had alternated with Bob Budiansky on the Marvel American book. The UK series would tell bridging stories that took place in between major events in the American title, and would even pick up the continuity after issue 80.
Now, this is because in the United Kingdom, a lot of comics are published in these treasury-sized anthology formats, and might only contain about 10 pages or so of various story material. Basically, a chapter of a story would be a 10-page part of it. I wish I had some of these to show you in a physical form, but there was no cost-efficient way for me to get them here in time for this recording.
When IDW had the Transformers license, they released compilations of the UK material, first in a massive omnibus format, and then in several smaller compilation volumes.
Today we're looking at a storyline from one of these smaller compilations. This is Transformers Best of the UK, Prey.
Optimus Prime stays in the main computer room of the Ark, as recent events have deeply troubled him with doubts the Autobots could truly function if he wasn't there.
Now I should point out that the adventure before this one had Galvatron, that's the upgraded form of Megatron from the future, traveling back in time to try to take over the Decepticons and lead them to victory, only for him to be thwarted by the combined efforts of both Optimus Prime and Megatron.
The thoughts of the Autobots politically collapsing after dying in battle spurs Prime to call in his Chief Lieutenant Wheeljack to implement a new plan. Elsewhere, Megatron attacks Motormouth of the Constructicons for implying that their leader wasn't strong enough to take down Prime on his own. The beatdown is interrupted by Soundwave suggesting a plan to isolate Prime and taking him out by sicking the Predacons upon him. All of this is according to Shockwave's plan.
Shockwave is a refugee from a Decepticon city-state called Tarn, who eventually kind of fled and teamed up with Megatron, who was the head of a Decepticon city-state called Voss. So Shockwave is constantly trying to undermine Megatron and take over from there. Now, the Predacons are a group of combiner Transformers who transform into vicious animals. Ranks include Razorclaw, who turns into a lion, Divebomb, who turns into a hawk, Rampage, who turns into a panther, Tantrum, who turns into a bull, and Headstrong, who turns into a rhinoceros. When in their combined form, they are called the Predaking. And yes, I am aware that they derive their name from the word predator, despite the fact that two of those animals are not actually predators.
Optimus Prime begins to implement his plan by leaving on a mission to deliver supplies on his own so as not to attract Decepticon attention. After a few hours, he gets attacked by Megatron and the Predacons. Prime is unable to radio for help or even fight back, as both his radio and blaster are quickly destroyed. Prime's only option is to race back to his tractor trailer and get the main part of his plan underway. Except Megatron attacks him just as he enters the trailer, and the next thing there is a white flashing light. When the Autobots arrive after realizing Optimus Prime's radio went down, all they find is his dismembered corpse.
And sadly, this time they don't have an 8 megabyte floppy disk in order to back him up.
The funny thing is that Prime is actually alive and on Cybertron, coming to the aid of an Autobot named Outback and trying to stop a Decepticon from infiltrating the Autobot city-state of Iacon. It turns out that the Predacons attacked Megatron and then activated the space bridge to shove both faction leaders inside. The corpse back on Earth was actually a decoy constructed by Prime and Wheeljack, who's the only Autobot in on this plan, to see if the Autobots could actually function if Prime were no longer in charge. As for Megatron, he's involved with the remains of the Decepticon General Straxus.
Straxus is a high-ranking Decepticon leader with a brutal streak so long that the other Decepticons usually just leave him alone. However, in a confrontation with the Autobot Blaster, that's the Autobots' version on Soundwave, it left Straxus with only his head remaining, which is now being kept alive in a suspended animation jar with fluid. For some reason.
Unfortunately, Megatron is able to utilize the Underground Information Network to spread a rumor that there's an imposter Optimus Prime trying to infiltrate Iacon on behalf of the Decepticons. To that end, when Optimus Prime tries to have a happy reunion with his longtime general Ultra Magnus, it winds up being an attack. The only objector to this is Outback, having seen with his own eyes that this is in fact the real Optimus Prime. When Ultra Magnus threatens to execute both Prime and Outback, the smaller Transformer activates a smoke bomb so the two can escape. As he begins to form search parties to look for the two, Ultra Magnus cannot but wonder if Outback's fervency might mean that the Autobot leader is in fact wrong about this being an imposter Optimus Prime. He doesn't get too much time to think about it, though, as a loud explosion is heard. It turns out Optimus Prime and Outback encountered a couple of Autobot guard units and got into a fight with them, with Outback being torn in half by a set of razor claws. This sacrifice has spurred Prime to try to get Outback to safety as quickly as possible. When Outback feels like giving up and accepting death, Prime tells a story about how the Autobots were stranded on a planet populated by cybernetic apes who were hostile to visitors. It turns out that the Decepticons Shockwave, Thunderclap, and Frenzy had also been stranded on the planet and refused an alliance with the Autobots, instead deciding to launch an outright assault on the cyber apes. The Decepticons then try to broker a deal with the ape leader Xenog, only to wind up being betrayed, forcing the Autobots and Decepticons to have to work together to defeat Xenog and get the equipment so that they can return to Earth.
And I'm pretty sure Outback is probably dead at this point.
Ultra Magnus and the other Autobots confront Prime, who only wishes for Outback to receive medical care. It's this act, where Prime cares for another and lamenting the Autobots' infighting would be Megatron's true victory, is what convinces Ultra Magnus' companion, the Autobot Elder Emeret Zeron, that this must be the real Optimus Prime. As Outback is taken care of, the reunited Cybertronian Autobots attack Voss and the Decepticon Energon storage units. This causes Straxus to demand to speak with Megatron, so he can initiate his grand plan.
Now I should point out we kind of skipped over a story that wasn't included in this collection where the Autobots had another encounter with Galvatron. Instead though, we got a little plot divergence that will pay off later, but I'll get to it when we get to it, okay?
When Megatron arrives, Straxus blasts him in the head with a beam designed to transfer his mind into Megatron's body. Megatron puts up a good fight and appears to have the upper hand as he fires off a blast to destroy Straxus' stasis tube. Only it actually wasn't enough, as Straxus now proclaims himself the new leader of the Decepticons. Meanwhile, Optimus Prime is really feeling the need to get back to Earth and inform the Autobots of his non-death. As the Earthbound Autobots manage to finally fight off Galvatron, they're informed of Optimus Prime's formal death, and a memorial service is being held in his honor. Back with Megastraxus, it turns out the transfer wasn't as complete as he previously thought, as the Decepticon leader begins vacillating between personalities. He's so confused he has absolutely no idea what to do when Prime and the Autobots bust into the base. This allows Ultra Magnus to blindside Megastraxus. Unfortunately, the Decepticon leader is able to then activate an antimatter generator, which will cause the creation of a miniature black hole that will soon expand and engulf everyone.
So now, in addition to Straxus, Megatron is going to have Maximilian Schell in his head too?
With no other choice, the Autobots activate the space bridge, with Prime and Megastraxus tumbling in, and the Predacons immediately coming back through. It turns out the Shockwave sent them in order to confirm Megatron's death. So imagine Shockwave's dismay that Megatron soon returns and just wanders off. Meanwhile, Prime crashes his own funeral, much to the Autobots' delight. However, the Predacons soon return to Earth just to wreak some more mayhem on their own. They literally crash a circus, which makes the local news, generally upsetting Dinobot members swoop.
And here is where that little plot tangent I mentioned before actually pays off. See, on Cybertron, Swoop, that's the Dinobot that turns into a Pteranodon, was actually known as Dive Bomb until he had a violent encounter with a Decepticon that seemingly left him for dead, and led to that Decepticon taking the name Dive Bomb for himself.
Swoop vents about the loss of his original name to fellow Dinobot Sludge and then storms off after not receiving much sympathy. As that plays out, Divebomb grows bored of the attack on the circus and decides to leave to do things on his own. He winds up quite literally flying headfirst into Swoop, and the two tumble into a nearby bog. The noise has attracted the attention of the Predacons, who decide to come to Divebomb's aid. However, the Dinobots also look after their own, as Grimlock leads Sludge and the others to fight in the battle as well. It's convenient, as this allows all of the Dinobots to pair off evenly with the Predacons. Eventually, though, Swoop realizes he needs to use his friends for help and leaves Divebomb in nearly attacking Grimlock. Grimlock transforms to robot mode and manages to slam Divebomb into the ground on repeated occasions, which causes the Predacons to run off, as Swoop realizes there's more to existence than just a name.
And that concludes our look at Transformers Best of the UK, Prey. How was it? Well, on the plus sides, I like the artwork through all of this. A lot of times when I'm reading Transformers comics, it can get a little confusing sometimes as to who's talking to who, especially when they're robot forms, or at least they're non-vehicle forms, let's just say that. Like there are times when someone's talking to Cyclonus and they clearly drew Galvatron or something like that. So, yeah, you can see where I'm getting from there. There's none of that in this. And there's some really nice action throughout the story with some spot-on characterization. The Generation 1 Transformers act like how you remember the Generation 1 Transformers acting. That's what I meant to say there, sorry. On the downside, yeah, there's too many missing parts. Like, to be honest, I think this really would have been better if that whole Galvatron thing I mentioned earlier had actually been in here. Not the story before this, but the re-encounter with that, because we don't get a lot of the Autobots on Earth acting without Optimus Prime and seeing how that's turning out. Instead, we just kind of get little snippets. We get them finding out about his death and holding a memorial service. But other than that, yeah, that's kind of it. Like, that idea, that aspect of the story is just not particularly well represented at all. In fact, I like the Dinobot story too, so I would have included that. But, maybe ditch the whole Optimus Prime talking about those cyber apes thing. That just felt like too much of a plot cul-de-sac. It kind of threw off the vibe of the story for me. And again, I kind of have to point out, I don't know how widely available this book is anymore now that Skybound has the license. And like I said, they may reprint it at some point, but it hasn't been announced yet. And even then, I'm willing to bet they might do it in more of an omnibus or a compendium format. So you would probably have to buy it and get a whole bunch of stories at once if you were looking for this one particular story. So again, availability kind of downgrades it a little bit in my book. It's not a huge thing, but it's something where I have to kind of drop it a letter grade that I normally wouldn't have. So, yeah, I am going to give Transformers Best of the UK Prey a C. It's alright. It's not world-changing, but, it's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, it maybe not being as widely available could hinder whether or not it's, enjoyable, for lack of a better term. So, yeah. Let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can help support the channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcat productions. There you can request a tray to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. And as always, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.